Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching this monthly in-depth ag forecast for Ag Carolina and Ag South Farm Credit. All right, I want to start you off this week by just looking back at this month of January and talking about the temperatures, because for most of the South, we have had temperatures, for example, over in parts of Texas, New Mexico, that are looking at a top 10 coolest. The farther you go here into Louisiana, Mississippi, we've even got some places here that are having like a top 5 coolest. And then into the Southeast, looking here in the Carolinas, into Georgia, down into northern Florida, it's pretty cold. And the reality of it is this, okay? If there's something I've got to have you take away from this video, it's the trajectory of the winds we've seen so far this year. We've had a highly variable Pacific jet that's largely come into the country like this and just kind of swirled around deep low pressure systems sitting here. There has been almost no subtropical component of the jet, which can come across the country something like this, which is critical for the whole of the South, including the Southwest, on getting the right kind of flow to bring in moisture. Instead, because of the lack of the subtropical jet, we've seen the big Great Basin highs form and the Santa Ana winds take place over in California. And because we've had such a highly variable North Pacific jet, we've been able to deliver very, very cold air across the whole of the South and Southeast on repeat throughout the month of January. And no, it was not well predicted. We didn't, really hone in on this pattern until we got to about the last week of December, that there was more confidence growing that this is how this January was going to shape up. Now, the last week of January, we're going to undo all of this. It's all going to shift around as it normally does. The weather doesn't care that we have a calendar. And we're going to be building a lot of warm air into the Carolinas, down into Georgia, Florida. And we're going to get a system that's going to dump a bunch of rain right in through after we just saw that epic snow event that went right in through here last week. And that was truly one for the record books that can only happen if you get all this cold air in place. What was amazing was the low pressure center was way down here, and it went pretty far to the south, clipped Florida, and then eventually went off to Europe to create that big windstorm we saw last week in parts of like Ireland, getting into the rest of the British Isles. But there's a lot to be learned from this map in particular. Okay, what I want to show you next is, let's go back. This wasn't that long ago that we were talking about the first blizzard warnings ever issued down here in Louisiana. Snow that broke records in Florida, heavy snow, Alabama, down here in parts of Georgia and along the coast of the Carolinas. Just take a look at that really sharp dividing line here where we had snow and where we didn't. Parts of New Orleans picked up nearly a foot. We had 8.8 inches of snow in Florida, setting a new state record. And it's just incredible. I think it's just amazing to look back on this event. This is going to be an event, by the way, that folks all along this area will be talking about forever. It'll just be like, when the kids are in their 30s and 40s, like, hey, remember the blizzard of 2025? And, it'll shape memories. That was a significant event that came through this particular part of the country. Now, I'm thinking about it from this perspective, okay? Let's look at the whole country and remember a couple of things. We've had 3 big snowstorms. Now, one that was here was way back in November, so I'm not going to include that one. But we had this one that went through Kansas and ended up in the Northeast. We've had the one that followed it a week later in January that was even farther to the south. And then we, of course, had the one that was last week that went right along the Gulf Coast. Now, I look at this and see a lot of neat things. For example, look at the big hole right here from eastern Texas to this part of the lower Mississippi Valley into Mississippi. There's just a place that didn't get anything. Same thing for North and South Carolina. if you get into this area, how many times have you been able to say there's been more snow along the coast than there has been in toward the Appalachian Mountains, coming off the Piedmont into the hilly country here? That doesn't happen. But because the statistics on this map are based off of data from 2008 to present, that's when they started keeping these particular records. I've got some weird stats down here. Southern Georgia, I got a spot down here, 26,000% of normal snow. That's because it's the only event that's been recorded in this area since 2008. So you kind of ignore these stats. But look at this. Symptomatic problems in the atmosphere. Snowpack in the Southern Rockies, in the Great Basin, in Arizona, very, very lacking. Snowpack on the headwaters of the Mississippi and Missouri River, lacking. Snow into the interior of the Northeast is okay, but coastal, no. Why has it been good in the interior? We've had cold air blowing across the Great Lakes. And this just tells me one thing. The jet has loved doing this, setting up the antecedent cold air to give you snow, but we've not had good subtropical flow to change it up. And that's what we'll be bringing in mild air but wet conditions. That's what we bring in snow to the headwaters of the Mississippi and the Missouri River, bringing in snow to the Southern California and Great Basin. That's what it is. We got a one-dimensional jet stream right now. And here's the big reason. If you look across the country, we've been able to spin up, let me take it back to this morning, we've been able to spin up little weak systems like the one that just went over Southern California lately. But pulling in just really good flow across the south has been a hard thing to do. Now, I've got a storm system that's cooking there right now. We'll talk more about this one in just a few minutes because this is going to hit the whole of the south end of the southeast. But we need to know what we've been up to against since. And I also like looking at this. You can see all the wave clouds over the mountains here in parts of Pennsylvania, just something neat to see. Very clear day across the Carolinas. This is the remnants of the snow that was back in early January. That's how cold it's been. It's stuck around here from Kansas all the way over to the Ohio River Valley. And just a reminder, in the Arctic outbreak of a week ago, we brought in on Kansas ground here that grows a lot of winter wheat that was not covered in snow. The snow was over here. They hit -10 to -12 in that area. And that was problematic for the winter wheat, we think, in that region. Just something to think about here. Okay, from there, I want to show you the issue. The issue with this pattern in January has been this big blocking high that has lived off the northwest coast, off the west coast at times. So the jet goes around it and dives into this trough, and there is the elongated trough. Now, the elongation of this trough is one of our bigger issues. Had it been tucked away right here, systems would be born in Texas and they'd roll right up the east coast. Okay, so they dive down, reinvigorate in Texas, and roll up the east coast. Instead, the winds have carried these systems on off to open ocean, not allowing them to spend much time rolling up the southeast coast, one, and two, getting their way all the way to the northeast, which is why we tended to see these systems exit so quickly. I mean, last week's winter storm, started here, and in less than 48 hours was already out to open ocean. So, I mean, that's how quickly these things have been moving on these powerful jet stream level winds. But it's this Pacific high that's got me thinking, because it's got everything all blocked up in the Pacific. So what do you see when you look at this map? I'll tell you what I see. This is water vapor in the upper levels of the atmosphere. And it acts as a tracer of the motion of the atmosphere. And our weather patterns typically come from this direction. That's the polar jet. There's the subtropical jet. And what do you see? You see flow doing this, or flow doing that, or flow going like that, and a big area of dry air that's being dragged into this region. And so the problem is this blockade on the pattern in the Pacific. It's actually called an omega block or a Rex block. It's got different names, but it's there. It's more meridional north-south flow than west-east. And what it's done, though, is it's cut off a little low right here over California. And over the weekend, that low did some great things. Not only did we see rainfall down here in California, but we actually saw some snow as well in the San Gabriel Mountains in the southern Sierra Nevada. And it was the first meaningful rain that some of these places have received since April. Meanwhile, had a little bit of a pull of moisture out of Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama. Some got into Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina over the weekend, but these rainfall totals were relatively modest compared to what we have been seeing in terms of precipitation. Now, where is it going as we look forward? Well, it's going to start with that low coming out of Arizona. It's going to take its dear sweet time to leave and slowly move in this direction, which is why this whole section here, stretching from eastern Texas through the lower Mississippi Valley up toward the mid-south, is quite wet. But notice this. That line returns on where we're drier versus wetter in Georgia and the Carolinas. Wetter west, drier to the south and east. And this system's really the only game in town for the near term. And that system's going to have a chance at putting down quite a bit of rainfall here, but it's not going to get over to spread into the southeast, and it's not getting back west enough to hit some of this part of Texas, just as kind of a benchmark on where this thing's going to be. Also, it's not hitting here. We're leaving this whole area open for at least another week until we maybe get into that second week of February to start to return snow to places that haven't seen it. So just kind of thinking big picture on this. Where's all the action going to be outside of that? It's going to be back in the northwest. That's really what this pattern's setting up itself up to do. So we need to assess this and understand what it means. Now, outside of our big snowstorm and then the rains we got this weekend, we would have been continuing on a bone dry time frame. This is the last 7 days, national map, percent of normal precipitation. This is the last 14. That's what terrible, weak, pathetic flow does. You get cold, dry air from the Arctic, but no good storm systems other than the guy that came through here. Now, before that, let's go back 30 days. Now we're capturing some of the stuff that was happening at the end of December and the beginning of January. But I still see dryness. Look at North Carolina, this part of South Carolina. Much of Georgia is still in it's in these colors, 60 to 80%. You come back to Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, Nevada, California, we're looking at very, very low numbers. And if you go back 60 days, this is beginning to reveal our problem areas here and here. Now, farther to the north, there are issues. There's still on the U.S. Drought Monitor a big section of the country that's dry here, but we've seen degradation of drought in the Carolinas. It continues to be bad in this part of Texas. This region is off of the Drought Monitor primarily because of the snowstorm that happened in January and the snowstorm we had back in November, plus the rains that came in November. But as you look at this map, I just say, well, how much has it changed? Let's go to the change maps. This is just in the last week. We've seen degradation and drought here. You go back over the last month. Let's do that. 4 weeks. There you go. So improvement, degradation, 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 and drought. And look at these pockets, Carolinas and Georgia and Florida. Okay? Next, soil moisture. There is still, I just want you to see this, going down 16 inches. There's fall's drought still lingering here. Look at this. That's a big section of the Carolinas. We still see dryness here, despite all the wet conditions that keep coming out farther to the east. We're doing okay in this section of the south, but very dry as you get into Mexico, Arizona, New Mexico, and California. And our North American drought monitor shows it. So patchy, permanent, worrisome. And I can show you what this looks like in terms of ranks as well. So just so you see, parts of North Carolina here are having a top 5 driest January on record. We're dry throughout other sections of the Mid-South, even though we're going to make some corrections on this soon. And then the farther into the south and west you go, including down into Mexico, this is very dry. So are parts of the Corn Belt. I mean, you cannot ignore the Corn Belt in these forecasts because this is where, these are the headwaters of 2 major river systems. And the Mississippi at Memphis right now is 1.8 feet below low stage again. And so we're just looking at all of this, taking it all in as a big picture of what's going on across the country. And I'm just going to tell you what you have to watch with me. This is what our jet stream has been doing since December 1. It's extended to times but never been able to make it past, this line from Hawaii to the Aleutian Islands. So there's been weak flow anomalously out of the east at times until you get over to the Carolina coast where systems have just ripped off into the Gulf of Mexico. This is all the wrong flow type to deliver sustained returned moisture to broad areas. So what do we end up getting out of it? We get pockets of moisture, which I'm going to show you again in a few moments. But overall, this pattern has got to develop a secondary component to the jet stream. It just doesn't have it yet. So what am I talking about? Let's go over the Pacific first. All right, there's your big Pacific block. So there's the stronger piece north. And this is about the strongest I've seen the subtropical jet all year. And it's pathetically weak. Okay? Off the East Coast, everything's coming together way over here, and this is what's just sending systems out, not letting them linger. Very strong winds going across the open Atlantic. So we're trying to assess if anything like this is going to change in the near term, and in the very near term, like the next week or so, no. But I think I have some information that you're going to want to see that goes beyond that into the month of February. Because right now we've got a little clipper moving across the Great Lakes. That's some snow into the northeast. You get into later in the day on Wednesday, some storms are going to come up in parts of Texas as the upper level low that hit California this weekend still stirs its way across Arizona, New Mexico. If you're in the southeast, this whole region is drier through the end of this week while we're going to be watching storms in the overnight hours Wednesday into Thursday into this region of the south. And again, really Thursday night over the lower Mississippi Valley. But, Georgia, North, South Carolina, you got most of this week where you're on the drier side of average. So when does the moisture come in? Because are these severe storms we're expecting on Thursday going to make their way into the southeast? But right now in forecast Wednesday in Texas, Thursday down here around eastern Texas, Louisiana. Well, to assess that, let's go to the European model. I think it's the best initiated model at this point, so I'm going to trust it. So this is through Wednesday into Thursday. That, again, from Texas to the lower Mississippi River Valley, storms. Do they make it into the southeast? Yes, by Friday. We're going to see if we can increase the risk of some of these to be strong, and that'll be something to watch very carefully. But that front's going to go ripping through this area relatively quickly, giving a chance at some moisture. But do you see how the front loses its main characteristics as it goes offshore? This will give us this west to east drop in precipitation totals in the Carolinas and Georgia as you go forward into this weekend. Then after that, all the attention goes to the northwest. And we just don't see a lot across, the whole of the south. What I'm waiting for is around the 5th and the 6th to start to see another storm system form. Big trough dives in, opens up the Gulf of Mexico, low forms right here, high pressure sits over the Carolina coast, drier there but starting to pump. And that could set things up late in the first week of February to be quite active. Now in the near term, if we just add up what we've got coming, it looks something like this. So this is through Wednesday into Thursday and Friday. Let's just pause it there midday Friday. Between now and midday Friday, we're dry. I mean, you can see the dryness that we're dealing with, over here in Georgia, North and South Carolina, Florida. But as you go east, the precipitation picks up in the mid-south, 1 to 2 inches, easily going to be found here down into this part of, of Texas. Then we're going to add to it. It slowly picks up in amounts as you get over there toward Georgia and North Carolina. When is that? That's the front zipping through on Friday. And then all the action goes back into the west. So we're going to keep an eye out for this time frame that will be really cranking up around February 6th, 7th. So up until then, since that's 10 days away, notice that our wettest corridor is where you see white, but the highest probability of staying below a half inch is down here in the southeast corner of the United States, the northern plains, and the Sun Belt. Now, if we start looking at who's wet, here's the probability of going over an inch. High probability here, how about over 2 inches? Still a 70 to 90% chance of that. And that's where the target of the next system is really going to be painted, right in through this area. Okay, does anything change after that February 6th time frame? Yeah, look at the ridge that's going to set up over the south and southeast. Look at the trough in the northwest. That's the system that could kick through, that could be interesting for the whole of the south. Eventually, by the time we get to the end of week 2, which we're looking out there, February 9th, 10th, and 11th, could be dragging a system through. And so some of the models are starting to pick up on that. If we kind of zoom out here and have a look, you can see week 2 forecasts from all 3 setups. The European is the most aggressive on keeping this whole region with better chances of moisture as we go from February 5th to 11th, I think just based on the size of this system that's sneaking out in this area. Okay, let's talk temperatures, then we do long range, and we'll wrap this up with some stuff about South America. This is nice. You look here at the, at how things are going in terms of frost, and I've got such a big area that's now out of the frost picture, right? We saw this map before, getting all the way down to the Gulf Coast. Take a look at what these temperatures are going to do. Here's today's highs on Tuesday as I'm recording. There's Wednesday. Where's the low? The low is still here. So mild air stretches across this whole region. Very mild in the Midwest for this time of year. But we've got mid-70s, transitioning to the 50s and 60s over here in the Carolinas. Then you go forward into Friday, major warm-up. Look at that. And then you get out there to Saturday and Sunday. There's still more mild air to be had. But you can see it reloading. And day 5 through 10, that's where the coldest air is going to anchor. Now, this is what's interesting. I keep talking about February 6th, 7th, and 8th. The cold air anchoring itself here while more mild air lives there means that the jet's going to want to run in between the two. And as it does so, the question mark is, getting out there to the middle of the month, does some sort of southeast ridge pump moisture in here while the jet stream comes living in the middle, keeping things wetter? And some of our longer term forecasts are starting to get a bit more kind of like a hint toward that. So for example, the new CPC outlook through the third week of February, the start of the third week of February, has this corridor wetter, but it's anchoring dryness here, getting down into parts of Mexico, and dryness along the Gulf Coast. Mild, but I'm going to tell you something. Don't expect every day to be mild. We're going to punctuate this with cold air quite a bit. Does that forecast match the European model? Well, this is a pressure map. So low pressure in these colors, high pressure in these. Now, you know what I'm going to say. Gosh, where was it? It was way back here somewhere. My goodness, where did I put it? There it is. I want to know if that guy is going to go away. So we come back to it. There it is. And as we play it week by week, going into mid-February here, late February, even into the beginning of March, this high pressure cell has migrated a little bit. And what the models are doing in response to that is giving us the 30-day outlook ending, the beginning of March, that paints a drier picture here, possibly drier there, but very active. Now, I said drier, not dry. Okay? I want to be clear. Drier, not dry. Because the lack of the subtropical jet is going to ruin the chances for really wet conditions. But we will see systems that will gain momentum here and roll through in this direction based on this pattern, which will drag fronts and bring systems that will hit the whole of the South going forward. Take a look at northern Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, looking wetter than average, while parts of Oklahoma, Texas are on the drier side of it. And that forecast is being echoed all across the board from every long-range model we've got. And it makes sense given a few things. One, we have the MJO. It's right now in phase 3. We expect it to go from phase 3 to 4 or 5. You say, well, Eric, what does that mean? You always talk about that MJO. It means this. What does phase 3, 4, 5 look like? Drops low pressure. See the blue contours and the height lines? Meaning flow comes through while there's a ridge at times sitting here, putting moisture in place. See that? That's what typically happens when you get this. And don't forget, we still have a La Nina. I mean, our La Nina right now, well, that was terribly drawn. Our La Nina right now has got some potency to it. I mean, there's our coldest water, but this just recently went cool again. I mean, take a look at this. In the last week, that region started to drop some colder water back into place. And if we think this through, let me just slide down here and show you. We've got this idea that, if this is where those ocean temperatures are going to spend time, that's well below a degree C. We could be dealing with La Nina conditions for a while longer, maybe through February. I mean, the CPC thinks so. Now, what's interesting is getting into spring, the risk of La Nina drops, the increased chances of neutral conditions increases, and that's where our biggest wild card is going to be in spring and summer. And I'm going to tell you something. Most of my analog years, which I've shown you over time, and most of the long-range models are hooked on a post-La Nina typical pattern. You go, what is that? It's this. Now, I could look at any of the models. I could show you the government's model. Doesn't matter. They all have some sort of flavor, whereas February, March, and April, the risk is drier here. Why? No subtropical jet. Drier along the coast. I've got big question marks about this, but wetter in this quarter. I would extend more of the risk of this wetter all the way down into the southeast. I'm worried about the dryness here. That's February, March, April, according to the National Multi-Model Ensemble. Now, is this the best modeling suite there is? No. But what's interesting is how similar it is to some of the analog years and similar it is to the European model and others. What I don't like about it is the color bar makes it look as though it's feast or famine, flooding or drought. And that's, you just got to understand, look at this. These are not massive swings, but this would be March, April, May. This would be April, May, June. And this is May, June, July. So what did you see? I saw drought in Mexico push and hit more of this area. I saw the southeast go wetter. And that transition has got, it's rented some space in my head, and I'm afraid that I'm seeing it so often that it starts to become too much of the narrative, and I'm not looking for the failure points. What are the failure points with this? It's getting the jet stream to develop some sort of subtropical component. It's getting the Gulf to open up and taking the dry line farther and farther back to the west. It's keeping the moisture around in the Carolinas from the near-term system's longer range. And I think that's what we're going to be talking about. So I'm showing you this, but I want you to understand you need to take this forecast with a pretty big grain of salt and understand that these videos are there to keep you up to date on a better cadence rather than just looking at one time and seeing what the longer range is going to be. Okay? But that's the latest thinking. Let's finish this up with a bit on South America. This animation, let's shrink that back up. This animation here, sorry about that, has shown us that we've been able to get storms in some dry places. Let's see if we can get this playing again. Maybe I got to refresh it. There we go. These storms that have hit parts of Argentina, you probably heard a narrative that Argentina's been bone dry. We've had storms. See, look at the one this morning, right there, right in the heart of Argentina's growing region. Because for the last month, Paraguay, the eastern side of Argentina, including Buenos Aires, into Uruguay, southern Brazil, and this little pocket of Mato Grosso do Sul have been dry. And there's been a narrative out of it. But I'm going to tell you something. If you're thinking about the crops grown here, man, Argentina's biggest, most productive area is here, outside of that. And coming up north, I mean, this is the big production area north. There is a tremendous amount of production that's in the south, but it's pockets in the south. And I show you all that just to let you know that rains are returning here over the next week. We're still drier along the Paraná River and the Uruguay River, which is here. Is Buenos Aires a bit drier? Sure, but take a look. Week 2, they're trying to bring rain back in there and open up a harvest window again in the north. You've probably seen that the harvest of soybeans up here has been problematic. It's very late. The planting of safrinha crops are very late, and the issue has been the too wet. So they could use a dry week in February to get some more of this done. And you can see, let me rephrase that, a drier week. And they could, instead of getting 2 to 3 inches, get maybe 1 to 2 inches over the next week in that area, or week 2 in that area. So keep an eye on it because it seems like narrative is coming out of South America, and we just need to see what's really going on there, which is why I showed you these maps. Okay, that's all I got. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk soon. Thanks.